is how we avoid estate taxes. So a good estate plan should have each and every one of these components in it. And one thing I kind of want to start with, I'm going to end with too. You might be watching this thinking, oh, I don't need an estate plan. I don't need to worry about estate taxes. I'm not there yet. I don't own anything, or I don't own much. Yeah, but don't you want to? Like, isn't that the reason you're watching the video, is you're trying to build wealth? So why would you try and build wealth and then in the same intention, the same thought, say, I don't need to put any of the plans in place because I'm not going to have any in the first place? Like, which one is it going to be? It's not, you can't have both. So if you're intending to build wealth, I want to encourage you, start thinking about this stuff now. Even if you're not in the position where it would apply to you today, by doing this now, you're planting the flag in the ground and saying it's going to be in my future. It's going to happen. Okay. So first thing I want to talk about, why have an estate plan? Why not just write it all down on a napkin and stick it in a safe and tell someone you trust and then hope that they take care of business for you when you die? Okay. Why not just do that? Because it sounds easier, right? And no one ever told you you needed a will. And it seems like it's just a bunch of lawyers trying to get their fees and another thing someone's trying to sell. Okay, are you thinking that right now? Because if you are, I want to show you why. Number one, if you don't have a will, guess who chooses where your assets go? The state government. So let me ask you this. Do you really trust your state government to put your assets into the hands of the people that you wanted them to go to? Guys, these are people that can't even do simple math. They can't even balance a budget, which is just addition and subtraction. Do you really expect them to be able to assign objects to the right people when they can't figure out plus and minus signs? Okay, so you're not dealing with intelligent individuals here. When you have the state choose where your assets go, that means that if you wanted, let's say you had an investment property that you wanted to go to a certain person, and you might have even verbally told them, hey, you're going to get this when I die. This is for you. This is something I want you to have. If you die and the state chooses, that person probably doesn't get it. Okay, they have a default system of where those assets are going to go to. So if you don't have a will, the state chooses. If you don't have a living will, your financial decisions cannot be made without your say-so. So if I'm incapacitated, I can't make decisions. I'm not, in the right state of mind. Maybe I'm not able to because of a medical reason. Certain investment decisions cannot be made on my behalf. Imagine if I was in the middle of negotiating an investment property, and all of a sudden I have a heart attack and I'm elderly and I'm on my deathbed now, or I'm in the hospital and I'm not coherent, and I don't have a living will set up, and that deal now goes south financially for me because I didn't have the ability to actually act. Okay, or maybe I wanted to pay off a debt, or maybe I was selling my house, or maybe I bought an investment that I was selling on a short-term flip, and I missed my window because they couldn't do it without my permission, because I didn't elect who was going to do that. So that's my living will. Okay. Next is healthcare directive. So this is medical. So it's similar to a living will. It's with medical. And that could be, if I don't have a healthcare directive, maybe I don't want to be kept on life support. Did you guys know if I don't want to be kept on life support, but I don't have a healthcare directive, the hospital is going to keep me on life support anyways? They can't pull the plug. They can't make that decision without my say-so. Okay. And think about, again, this goes back to the financial. What if I was doing that for financial reasons? I was like, hey, I don't want them charging up my estate with this medical bill that I'm going to have to pay out of my assets that my beneficiaries should be inheriting. I want them to pull the plug, and they don't. And now I'm racking up $3,000 or $5,000 a day in the hospital over and over and over. That adds up quickly. Okay. Or maybe it's, I don't want certain medical treatments done to me because, again, they're against my principles or against my ethics. But if I don't have a healthcare directive, like, the hospital makes those decisions for me. So there's so many things that can go wrong if you don't have these documents lined out. Now, the ones that are a revocable living trust, my estate will go through probate. And again, we're going to talk about probate, but it's not fun. It's long, necessary. Usually it does more harm than good. So if you don't have a trust, your will actually might not do what you thought it could do, because your estate goes through probate and the government still is going to make the final decision on what happens. And then finally, You have an irrevocable life insurance trust. Okay. And this is where the sacred account actually comes into play with estate planning. If you have estate taxes, an irrevocable life insurance trust is going to handle that for you. If you don't, and again, we're going to talk about estate taxes, then you have that due. You're going to have to pay that out of your estate. Your beneficiaries are going to be out money that you thought that they would have. Okay. And this isn't, the trust fund baby, what you see, the nightmares where people inherit money on TV. This is, you worked your entire life to build a legacy, knowing you wanted to give it to your kids and grandkids. What if there was a chance that it couldn't actually happen because you were missing the documents? You're not around to know about it or fix it. And your family thought that they were going to get one thing and it ends up totally different because you didn't have this in place. Okay. So I want you to change the mindset from the timing isn't right, I don't need that yet, I'll figure it out later, to it is irresponsible of me as a human being to put my family in that position. Okay, part of my story, because we didn't have all of this stuff lined out for my mom, when my mom died, my older sister, she ended up handling most of the stuff. She was the executor of the estate. And because the estate was not wrapped up, my sister, who had 2 kids at the time, a full-time job, had to spend probably 15 to 20 hours a week figuring all of this stuff out for weeks on end. And right after a death. So there's emotions going on, all of that stuff, to get this stuff finished because it was court mandated. We had to do the thing the court said that we needed to do. And she was the one that had to do it. Okay. Now, my mom didn't know about any of that, but if you are watching this, you know about that. And I'm telling you, if you hear this and you're like, oh, screw it, my kids can handle it anyways, you're a terrible person. You should not put that on anybody. So wrap your mess up, get it organized ahead of time, because nobody signed up for it. Nobody's going to want to do it for you. And if you're just resting on the fact that they're going to have to because that's what will happen, you need to really change the mindset. Okay. So change the mindset to, this is foundational. This is a fundamental step. This is the responsible thing to do. It's no different than driving around with no car insurance. You might be like I am. I'm like, hey, I'm not going to get in a wreck. Okay, but what if someone else hits me? And what if there's passengers in my car? I can't make that decision for them. They didn't know that. It's my job to make sure I'm insured when I'm driving. That's just the right thing to do. You don't argue with it. It's just yeah, that makes sense. I should probably handle that. So that's why you need to have an estate plan. Now, a couple things I want to clarify here, the will versus the trust. So I want to break this down. You guys have heard of wills. You've heard of trusts. I kind of want to give you a difference on what's what here. So a will goes like this. So a will states your wishes for asset distribution. So you're putting onto an official document saying, this is where I want my stuff to go. This is who I want it to go to. It's stating your wishes for the distribution of your assets. Okay. Now, a will does go through probate. Probate is the court system. And I'm going to go into detail on what that means for you in a second. But if you have a will, you still have to go through probate. You're not going to avoid that with a will. A will can be misinterpreted. So a will is only as good as it's understood. You might have written it one way, but if you wrote it in a way where the court interpreted it wrong, or maybe it's fuzzy, it's not super clear, or you weren't detailed enough, it can be misinterpreted, or it can be contested. Okay, which means that someone calls bullshit. They say, hey, that's not what he wanted. I don't think that's correct. I don't think that that's what it actually says. I don't think you're interpreting that properly. So you can easily change and manipulate a will even after it's been put into effect, just based on how clear and concise it was written. And then if those things happen, it automatically will default to state law. So if I wrote one thing, but the court misinterpreted it, or I got it contested, or it wasn't clear, the default is the state will end up making the decision on what it actually said, and they will make the decision on where those assets are going to go to. So that's a will. Now, you do need a will. Next is a trust. So I want you to think of a trust as a living extension of you. It's almost like you are writing your own constitution for your assets, that when you pass away, your beneficiaries have to abide by that constitution. Okay, so in a trust, it's almost like you're still alive. How would dad want it? How would mom want it? We just go read the trust and it says. So you can get very specific with a trust. There's a lot of control there. The nice thing with a trust is it completely avoids probate. And again, we'll talk about what that means here in a second. This probate thing is a real thing. So your trust completely avoids probate. By having a trust in place, you avoid the probate system. Your trust cannot be contested. It's not something that the court can look at and say, oh, this is what it meant. Like your trust, you're called the grantor of the trust. If you grant a trust, while you're alive, you manage it. Your attorney manages it. When you pass away, you elect what's called a trustee. So I want you to think of them as the CEO, and you've mentored them on what the trust says and how they're going to establish, the boundaries and keep everything in sync with what the trust was talking about. And because of that, it can't be contested. Everything has to go through your trustee. Everything has to go through your guy. That could be a family member. That could be your wealth coach. That could be your financial advisor. That could be your attorney. But your trust is going to be very, very hard to break down and contest. Ultimately, the beneficiaries of the trust have absolutely no say-so. Whatever the trust said is what the trust said. They can't get more money out of it. You can set it up to where they can't borrow against it. They can't borrow against the future value of it. You can give restrictions saying you don't get to have any money unless you do X, Y, Z. Or you could set up restrictions like if you do X, Y, Z, you don't get any money. So you can say, I want you sober. I want you financially literate. I want you to be working. I want you to do all of these things before you can access any of the funds, which is great, right? The biggest thing to realize, a trust is treated like another entity. So it's not going to have government interference. When you establish a trust, it's treated another person. So they're not looking at it as Jerry. They're looking at it as the trust, whatever I've named it, which is, running itself. It's got its own tax ID number. It's got its own trustee. It's got its own governing documents. And at this point, like I'm out of the picture. If I've passed away, whatever I set that trust up as is how it's going to be. Okay, so those are the differences. And I wanted to hit that because there's a lot of lack of education surrounding a will. And I would also say there's a lot of mystique and just mystery and kind of like just romanticism around what a trust is. And so a lot of people are like, man, I need to get a trust and they don't know why. So I want to just make sure we know the differences between the two. So I want to hit the will first. We're going to dive into the will first. It's kind of the fundamental first step. Your foundation starts here. So you have your last will and testament. This is, again, the legal document by which you will dictate who will receive your estate. Okay. As you're going to make it official, all those things. You have in the will. So the first one is called, and that's you. So the testator is the individual that created the will. That's going to be you if you've made your will. Okay. You have what's called the executor. So the executor is your personal representative. So when you pass away and the executor gets a hold of your will, their job is to petition to open probate on the will. The only way the assets get distributed is through probate. So your executor has to provide proof of death, let the court system know we want to open probate, distribute the assets. We want to have a reading of the will and get everything done that the will says. Okay, so that's their job. They're going to make sure that your estate gets distributed. Now with the will, here's the deal. If you owed creditors and they have a lien or a position on your assets, they got to get paid first. Okay, so your executor, they're going to pay any credit cards you had, bills you had. They're going to settle your estate. If you owed taxes, they're going to handle that. If you had liens, they're also going to handle that. And then anything left is going to go to your beneficiaries according to what the will says and also what the state says. Okay. So for those of you that are like high leverage investors where you're like, man, I want to have all this debt and I don't want to have any equity and I want all my money working for me. That's great, but that's not legacy wealth. You might have cash flow, but your assets will never go to your heirs because your estate will get settled. Your debts will get paid. Your beneficiaries will get what's left. You leveraged out, so you've probably got nothing left. Okay, so when you study the top 1% of wealth, their debt to asset ratios are about 5%, which means that for every $1 of assets, they only have 5 cents of debt. For every $100 of assets, they only have $5 of debt. Okay, and it doesn't mean they never use debt. It means that they understand legacy. They understand that they're creating a dynasty that they're trying to pass down. So they buy assets that cash flow so they can pay themselves down and off over time and have strong equity positions. I might be able to kill it with debt, but my grandson, he might be terrible with numbers. And if I gave debt to him, that might be a bad idea. He doesn't know how to manage it. My trustee might not be able to manage all that stuff. I can mentor them and train them and teach them and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, like, I want to give them something that's healthy, that's high equity, and it's going to actually pass down, not just get settled out and they've got no equity left. So that's the executor. Then you have the devisees and the legatees. Those are your heirs. Those are the beneficiaries, the people that are actually going to get the stuff. And you do need to name all those out. You do need to make sure you're clear about who's going to get what. And you do need to make sure it's very specific and it cannot be contested. And if you've got kids and grandkids and all this stuff, there's probably going to be family feuds where somebody thought that they were going to get one thing and really they didn't, and someone else did, and they're jealous, and they can try and contest it. They can try and get the will changed. They can do whatever they want to do to try and get the thing. And if you're not specific, it might actually happen. Or worse yet, they might contest it and the court might say, hey, yeah, that's not specific. But the court might jurisdict that they don't get it and the original beneficiary doesn't get it, and a third party in your family entirely different gets it instead, because that's the decision that the court made. So you need to be very specific with this stuff. So some of the risks with a will, like a will does not solve all of your estate problems. You will still go through probate. Your will can be contested pretty much for any reason. Like within reason, if somebody can call a contest on the will, they will, and it will happen in court, and the court's going to have to look at it. They can't just say, oh, no, that's invalid, we're not going to listen to it. If it sounds legitimate, the court will stop and they will look at the will, and they're going to dive into it to see if there's any validity to the claim. And if there is, it's going to lengthen probate, it's going to increase your legal costs, and it could change the will entirely, or again, just go to the default of what the court says. Your will can be misinterpreted. And then your will could be non-compliant with state laws, which is why you don't just write it on a napkin or whatever and stick it in your safe. You might have this grandiose idea of what your will is going to be, and you don't like attorneys and fees, so you write it yourself, and you're like, man, I'm good. Everything's awesome. And then you die, and then it goes to court, and they say, yeah, this is not state compliant. We can't do any of this. Could you imagine? We're not going to carry through any of this stuff because it's not state compliant. Instead, the state court system is going to make the decision now because the will wasn't compliant. So those are some of the risks with a will. Now realize, like, most people don't even have this. So if I went through the will and it concerned you and you were like, man, that sounded like it was, maybe going to solve some things, but there's also some glaring concerns. Okay, this is only if you have a will. If you don't have a will, that's called intestate. It means that you have no will. All of it goes to the state. They make the decisions on everything, and your family just has to deal with it. So you got to first take that step, have a will. Next is the living will and the healthcare directive. I want to kind of hit these at the same time. So your living will and healthcare directive. So this is going to state your wishes regarding life-sustaining treatment. Okay, so if you haven't stated, again, the doctors must keep you alive. If you didn't want that, that sucks. They can't make a life or death decision without you being competent and aware that it's happening, which means you're going to just be on life support till you can't be on life support anymore, and you just end up dying even with it. Or you come back to life and your quality of life is terrible and you didn't want to be alive anyways, and now you're stuck. Okay, so that's going to be something the living will and healthcare directive will cover. It's also going to cover artificially administering food and fluids. So like imagine you having maybe some bad reactions to certain foods or fluids or materials they use. It's not in your healthcare directive. Nobody knows about it. They stick you with the IV and you're done because you are already weak. And now you have an allergic reaction or some sort of symptom that comes up in addition to it because you didn't have a healthcare directive that puts someone else in charge that knew those things about you. How terrible would that be? Next is end-of-life medical decisions. So that's going to be treatments, surgeries, and drugs. Okay, so a guy like me, I'm not big on drugs and treatments. I've never let a doctor touch me with surgery. I've never taken prescriptions. I never will. Doesn't matter how sick I am. But if I don't have a healthcare directive and I'm not conscious to make the decisions, they can go ahead and do that. Okay, part of, again, my story. So this came up with my mom. End of life medical decisions. She had cancer. They gave her a bunch of prescriptions. The genius doctors didn't look at the side effects. And so literally she took all these prescriptions and the side effects crossed and made a tornado of just random weird side effects. So for about 48 hours, my mom was a lunatic, talking to herself. Me and Lexi, it was scary. We had to stay in the cabin with her and like keep the doors locked. She was falling down the stairs, like standing over us while we were sleeping, just like super creepy stuff, super out of it. She didn't even know who we were. So we had to, at that point, we actually had to call the troopers because she wouldn't turn herself into the hospital. We had to call the cops. They had to lock her up in the cop car, drive her to the hospital and keep her against her will. And she didn't have a healthcare directive. So the doctors could do nothing. They're like, yeah, we pretty much just have to leave her in bed for a couple of days until we know that she's not a danger to herself. And then after that, we release her. Okay, at one point, the prescription spiked and they were actually talking about putting her into a mental facility because they didn't think that she was coherent enough to get out of the hospital. We couldn't say anything about that. So they could have stuck her in a psychiatric ward against our will, against her will, because that's what the hospital deemed was the best decision at that time. All because she didn't have a healthcare directive, a simple document saying, I elect so-and-so to make my medical decisions. So we watched that play out. That, for me, like we have one, Lexi and I have one, and we're in our young 20s because we understand the result of not having one. We saw it firsthand. Okay. So that's the healthcare directive, end of life financial decisions as well. So think about your life has changed, but your bills didn't. You end up in hospital, mortgage is still due, bills are still due, investments are still happening, debts are still accumulating. And so if you don't have someone to manage that for you and you haven't been doing it and you've been in the hospital for so long, what happens is it just racks up. Like imagine when you pass away and your beneficiaries are going through your assets and your executors looking at this and they realize you have 6 months of missed mortgage payments, your house is being foreclosed on, and they've got to deal with that process in the middle of settling your estate because you didn't have somebody elected to make those decisions for you. Okay. Risks. So risks with the healthcare directive. So again, unwanted life support and medical decisions, financial backlog on your estate. These are risks of not having one. Okay. The risks of having one, I mean, really, I would say there aren't any. You're going to put a real human being that knows you in charge of this stuff instead of hospitals, doctors, and the state government making the decisions on your behalf. So the downside is zero. The upside is 100%. Like you're going to have all of this stuff handled by someone you know, like, and trust. That's going to carry it out the way you said it needed to happen. So this is a big one to have. This one is not just for you, but it's for the people involved. I can tell you when my mom was in the hospital, everyone in the family had to take time off work. Everyone in the family for about a week, like couldn't sleep, was concerned, like didn't know what to do. We were stressed out. We didn't know what was going to happen. So realize, like, again, your world is bigger than you are. And this estate planning stuff, it's for people that realize life is not just about me and what I can consume while I'm alive. It's about who am I leaving behind? What am I leaving behind? How do I affect them? How are they involved in all this stuff? So someone that sees this and like, oh yeah, I don't need any of that. That's very small thinking. That's very selfish thinking. It's very small-minded. And you need to think a lot bigger than that. And I can't make you. I hope you figure it out. Like, I hope you realize that life isn't just about you and your two little legs and your heart that beats for so long and everything else outside of that sphere doesn't matter. But if you don't figure it out, like that's what it's going to be. And you're going to be like, A, not remembered. And B, if you are remembered, all you're going to be remembered for is the trouble you caused when you died. Nobody wants that. All right. So probate, we've talked about probate. What is probate? Okay, so what is probate? Probate is a state court supervised process of authenticating your will. So you wrote a will, you think you're good. The will is now going to probate. Your executor has to carry it through the state court. They're going to read through your will. First thing they're looking for is, do we understand the will? Does the will clearly state what it's asking for us to do and what needs to happen? Okay, so I understand the will. Awesome. What happens next? Next, we're looking at, all right, well, is the will compliant with state law? Doesn't matter if we understood it. Is it legal? Is it something we can actually carry out? If not, guess what? I, the state, get to now choose what's going to happen. Okay, so if there isn't a will, Or if the will is unclear, the state will choose where your assets go. This is different for every state. It takes a long time if the state has to make the decision. Like, again, think about you're dealing with a government. You're dealing with a government. The government moves slow. Governments are incompetent. They're unorganized. The last people you would want dealing with your estate. And then here's the other deal. How many of us like privacy? Like, who would want people knowing your bank balances and your mortgage bill, all that stuff? Nobody, right? So when you go through probate, 100% of all of your estate becomes public information. Anybody can look it up in the court system. Anybody can see who got what, who didn't get this, what you had, what you didn't have. An example of this was when John Rockefeller died. Stuff went through probate, the estate, all of that. Or not Rockefeller, sorry, Morgan. When JP Morgan died, all of his information became public. His rival, John Rockefeller, made the public comment of, I would have figured he had more assets than that. Published it. Because that's how accessible it is. He knew right off the bat, JP Morgan only had this, and I think he should have had this. I'm going to go ahead and make fun of him while he's down. So if you don't want everyone knowing everything, you want to avoid probate. Here's the other deal. Probate can take up to 18 months on average. That's average, which means it could be shorter, but it also means it could be longer. Sometimes probate can take years. So imagine like you have all of these assets put away and you got this plan and this will and you want everything to go according to plan, and it takes 3 years. Now, during this period, let's say it even is just the 18-month average. During that 18 months, your heirs have absolutely no access to your assets. If you've got bank balances, the bank gets alerted, your assets are in probate, can't touch them. Investments, house, all of that stuff, like it's off limits. The state has a hold on it until the probate is done. Your beneficiaries can enjoy none of it. Now, not only that, probate costs money. Probate is not free. You're going into court. Court's not cheap. Court's expensive. Okay, and this is just my philosophy or theory. Attorneys oftentimes won't sell trusts. They'll just sell wills. Okay, so if I sell Nano a will, knowing he needs to have a trust to avoid probate, but I just give him a will, Nano, why do you think I would do that?
With that type of interest in me not having a trust.
I want to be Nano's estate attorney when his assets go through probate, because now I can charge per hour and a retainer. If I do a trust, Nano avoids probate. Now I don't have work. So think about that. You've got to understand, like, you have to be responsible for your assets. This is the same reason we tell people don't just hand money to a financial advisor. Don't just do a will with an attorney and be like, oh, good, I check it off the box now. Oh, I can go, do whatever I do. Like, at the end of the day, you've got to look at what's the actual strategy here. So it costs on the high end up to 15% of your estate in legal fees. So think about that. If it's $1 million estate, that's 150 grand, guys. Do you really want to pay 150 grand in legal fees when you probably can get a trust for like $500? It's $500 or $150. Which one would you rather pay? Probably just the 500. So when we work with our clients, we'll set up trusts for them, knowing that we're saving them 15% in costs. We're saving them 18 months of their beneficiaries not having access to any of what we've helped them build. That's why we do trusts, guys. So trusts help you avoid probate. Probate is a terrible thing. The way you avoid it, it's called a revocable living trust. Nano?
At what point should a person implement a trust?
Immediately. So as soon as you do a will, you should do a trust. Okay, so if you've got assets, that could be bank accounts, anything that would go to somebody. You might think you don't have anything. If you own a bike, the court needs to decide, where's your bike going to go? If you own DJ equipment, the court's going to have to decide, where's your DJ equipment go? So if you want to avoid, like, somebody in your life will be named executor, somebody in your life will have to go to court. They will have to spend time and money to make that happen. And they're going to have to carry out what the court says. If you want to just avoid all of that for them, then you just do a revocable living trust, put all that stuff in the trust. You die, it's good. They don't have to do any of that. Okay, so the point you do a will at the point, and even if you didn't do a will yet, you need to, and then you do a trust right after. The revocable living trust is the way you avoid probate. So it's going to be an entity that you create by you. So there's what's called the grantor. So you're going to be the grantor of the trust. Okay, the grantor is the person who creates the trust. Now, here's how you do it. All right, so I'm going to draw this on the side here. So we have the trust, we have you. Okay, we have all your assets. Let's say you own some real estate, you own some gold and silver. You're going to take all of this stuff while you're living. You're going to give it to the trust. Okay, now this is genius. I'm going to give it to the trust. The trust is its own entity at this point. So it's got its own tax ID number, and I'm going to give it to the trust. When I give it to the trust, it means it's not mine anymore. I don't own any of the stuff. The trust owns all of it. Now, while I'm living, I can still be the trustee or the manager, which means I can still have day-to-day access. Like in real life, not much changed. But on paper, I don't actually own anything. Okay, now here's the benefit of that. When I die, because Jerry doesn't own anything, nothing goes to probate. So they look at my estate and they're like, well, he didn't have one. He was broke. There was no money, there was no credit cards, there was no real estate, there was nothing. So none of my stuff goes through probate. Why? Because the trust owned it all. The trust doesn't die. Okay, in some states, by the way, if you set the trust up, you can have it last several hundred years, which means that trust is going to outlive you. It's called a dynasty trust. It's going to outlive you. It's going to outlive your kids. It's going to outlive your grandkids. So that's literally you becoming immortal financially. You will be able to govern the financial decisions of your assets for the next 300 to 400 years because you put it in a trust. There will be no drug addict kids getting into the money. There will be nobody going broke on it. There will be nobody, making these bad financial decisions. So that's what you do here with the trust. So you're creating it, you're putting your assets into it, you're managing it while you're alive. Now, here's the nice thing. When you die, you've got, it converts. So it goes from revocable to now irrevocable. So whatever you drew up for provisions and rules for that trust, they can never be changed now. They're like that forever. Now, you also choose a trustee. Okay, your trustee, that's the person you've mentored. That's the person that you've taught how you do things, why you did it this way, what they need to carry out for you. And that person now becomes your CEO. They're going to represent you and your trust to your beneficiaries and to anyone involved with that trust. So their job is to make sure that they carry out the trust the way the trust says, that it's properly done, that they've interpreted it. You can even pay this person. So imagine if you had, let's say you have kids, one of them is very financially savvy, and you want his job to just be to build the estate. I'm passing on millions of dollars. Your full-time job is to manage it, distribute it to your siblings and to the grandkids and stuff, and to grow that money. And you pay them, a salary or a bonus program based on how well they do that. That'd be a pretty freaking cool job, right? Like that's a thing you could do with a trust. You can't do that with a will. If it's a will, once they get it, it's theirs. They can do whatever they want with it. Okay, and you need to make sure that you really, really think about like the provisions in the trust. Okay, so again, the trust is set up. You're the grantor while it's being set up. You're the trustee while you're alive. And again, once you pass away, that trust becomes the property of the trust, and it's managed by the trustee. So I'm going to give you guys a real life example on a trust that I dealt with several years back. So it was a multi-million-dollar trust set up by the grandmother, leaving it to the grandkids and the kids. And one of the kids had a drug problem. She didn't know that, and she didn't specify that if they're not on drugs, they can't have any money. So it just says the trust is going to be distributed this much per kid and this much per grandkid each year. So this kid, like the trustee knew this kid was going to go buy drugs with the money, had to give it to him. Couldn't say no, knew exactly what was going to happen as soon as he got the money, and had to do it because that's what the trust said. So when you're sitting down and building this, that's why you want to be the grantor and the trustee while you're alive. It's something that you can always update while you're living. Once you die, though, it's set in stone. So you want to think about, all right, do I want the people sober? Do I want them financially literate? Maybe they have to go through some courses with us first. Maybe they have to go through our university. Maybe they have to read certain books. Maybe they have to attend certain events. Like you could literally be like, hey, you have to pass Wealth Dynamics University in full before you can access any of the money. You've got to do a wealth creation blueprint and meet with your coach quarterly before you can have any of the money. You can even specify the assets it can go into. You can only pull this money out if it goes into real estate and you work with this person when you buy the real estate. Like you literally can micromanage the money even though you're not there anymore. So you want to make sure like you got this thing built out. It's not just a one and done. You've done it once and then you're done with it. You never fix it. You want to customize it, update it, like take full ownership of this. This is you for the rest of your life, like thinking about what kind of lifestyle do I want my beneficiaries to have? And you have that level of control over it, which is a very high level of responsibility and a very high level of causation that should actually make you excited. Like think about creating an ideal scene for generations to come where they remember Nano. The reason why is it's on the top of their trust. Whenever they need something, they go talk to Nano's representative. They go talk to the trustee. So that's a trust, and that's, again, how you avoid probate. So, again, 15% cost for probate, 18 months of waiting. You avoid it by having a trust. Next is estate taxes. This is my favorite one to avoid. Estate taxes. So what are estate taxes? Most of us have never heard of this. Okay, anyone in the room like taxes? Do you like paying them? No, nobody likes paying taxes. Okay, if you do, you're severely financially illiterate. Not to pick on you, it's just a fact. So estate taxes. So think about this. You have paid taxes your entire life. Okay, your entire life, you're throwing down money to the IRS. You know it's not going to anything good. You know it's going to war and interest on debt, and it doesn't really do anything for you. You know Medicare is underfunded. You know Social Security is underfunded. You know we have a budget deficit, and the taxes really aren't helping, and you're trying to avoid them. And you've done a pretty good job of doing that, and you've built up a severe amount of assets now. You die, and you're like, man, I did a great job. I set up a trust, got my will, everything is good. Then boom, 40% off the top of your assets goes to the IRS. You didn't plan for it. You didn't know about it. So that's the thing. Taxes. It's an inheritance tax charged by the federal government on your estate when you die. So it's a federal tax charged on your estate when you die. There was actually, and I'll have to find the record to help you guys document and verify where this came from. There's a conversation that happened. It was documented back in the 1950s between one of the congressmen. And he literally said the idea that income tax goes to public works is a joke. So the government is looking for how much revenue can we get. Okay, so estate taxes is going to come off of your estate for single people. Anyone with an estate over $11.4 million is going to get hit. Okay, so the first $11.4 million of your assets is exempt. You pay no estate taxes. Anything over that amount gets taxed at a rate of 40%. 40%. Guys, that is a lot of freaking money to pay in taxes. Okay, for married couples, anything over 28 or 22.8 million. So the first 22.8 million, you don't pay any taxes on. Anything past that, you're going to get taxed 40%. Okay, that's a lot. Now, you might think of ways to avoid this. You're like, well, what if I just give it away? That's awesome. The gift tax rate, you're only allowed to give away $15,000 per year. Anything past that, you pay 40% on. You can't just give your money away while you're alive. The government already thought of that. In your lifetime, you're only allowed to give, I think, $200,000 away to individuals before you're capped and you can't give any more money to anyone else. So the government locked you down. They thought about, if we do the estate tax, Nano's going to try and give his money away. So we're going to cap him and say you can only give this much a year. And the gift tax is just as bad as the estate tax. So Nano's not even going to try. Okay. So for example, just to play this out, let's say that I have a $21.4 million estate and I'm a single person. $21.4 million. Now I've accumulated that. I'm happy about it. I'm going to pass it to my kids and grandkids. I've got some charities it's going to go to. It's going to be awesome. I'm actually kind of excited that when I die, I'm leaving behind a legacy that's going to outlive me and do good for people. Here's the problem. On that 11.4, nothing happens. Okay. But on the 10 million left over, that's taxed at a rate of 40%. So guys, I'm going to pay $4 million in estate taxes. $4 million off the top. That is terrible. So if I know about that, I'm pissed. I'm thinking about, how do I avoid this? I don't want to pay the IRS $4 million because I died. And I want you to think about this. Why do they have the right to that? I died. How is that a taxable event? Like, why would it make sense that they get to take 40% of my assets because I passed away? That's literally like stealing from a dead guy. How low can you get? Like, if you saw a dead guy, like a bum in the alley, is the first thing you do raid his pockets? No, like that's not what you do. The IRS is literally doing that to you in a financial sense. They're raiding your pockets after you die because they know you can't do anything about it. Okay, so that's estate tax. That should piss you off a little bit. Like, you should not be happy that that exists. But I'm going to show you guys how to avoid it. So how to avoid state taxes? You want to know how to avoid it, Nano?
Yes.
How about you, Lexi?
Yeah.
William?
Philip.
Philip wants to avoid them as well. So estate taxes, the way you avoid it is called an irrevocable life insurance trust, also known as an ILIT, I-L-I-T, irrevocable life insurance trust. So here's what we're doing. We can estimate based on our estate year by year how much I'm going to owe. So if I'm projecting, the average rate of return on my assets, I can put that literally with an Excel spreadsheet. I can put that into a calculator, project year by year what my asset value will be. I know what the threshold is for exemption. So anything over that amount, I can then calculate, I'm going to pay 40% in taxes. So here's what I would do. Now, I can't avoid the taxes from happening. They're going to happen no matter what. But what I can do is I can reimburse myself with life insurance. So what I would do is, let's say it's my previous example. I know I'm going to pay $4 million in taxes when I die. So I'm going to estimate, all right, $4 million in taxes is what I'm going to pay. I'm going to set up an irrevocable trust, and I'm going to have it purchase a life insurance policy for $4 million. Okay, so the trust is the owner of the policy. The trust is the beneficiary of the policy. Now, here's the thing with life insurance. Quick note. Life insurance is considered part of your taxable estate. So if you have a giant life insurance policy that you're the owner of and it's going to go as part of your estate, guess what's going to happen? You're going to have that life insurance taxed with estate tax rates if you're over the exemption level. So even though you don't pay income tax on life insurance, you do pay estate taxes, which is why you want the trust to own the life insurance. Again, if the trust owns it, I never owned it. And when I die, it like nothing happens because it was in the trust the entire time. So you're going to have the trust own the policy. There are some caps on premiums. So the premiums are actually considered a gift. So if I set up an irrevocable life insurance trust and I am individually paying the premiums for the trust, that's considered a gift, which means if I'm single, I can't pay more than $15,000 per year in premiums. So I've got to keep it under that. Otherwise, I'm going to pay gift tax rate, which is also 40%. If I'm married, my wife and I both get $15K to give. So I can pay $30K a year into my trust for that life insurance policy. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy a sacred account with the trust. I'm going to put the proper death benefit in place. And then I'm going to structure it with high early cash value. Now, here's the thing. If it's irrevocable, it means that I can't be the trustee. It has to be completely financially separated from me, which means when I'm alive, I've got to have a wingman that I trust to be my trustee for me. Because I'm no longer in charge. I can't touch any of that stuff. I can't receive any benefit. Nano?
If you're married, can it be your wife?
Not if she's in the trust as a grantor. So if I did a trust and none of Lexi's assets were in it and Lexi had no help in setting it up, Lexi could be the trustee.
If you guys are doing something together,
she can't be a part of it. Neither can I. So we'd have to pick somebody that's not financially involved with us that would be the trustee. That way they can manage it. Now, here's the deal. When I die, the estate tax will still happen. The IRS will still take the $4 million. But I have a $4 million life insurance policy. So let's say my $4 million life insurance policy did cost me, $30,000 a year. Now, if I set it up with high early cash value, I'm able to put the money in the policy. My trust can borrow against it and use that to buy assets that are going to go to my beneficiaries anyways. And then when I die, I've got assets in the trust for my beneficiaries that I've been using with the life insurance to acquire the entire time. And the death benefit pays out and it reimburses them all of the taxes that were just taken. How cool is that? That's pretty awesome, right? So that's how we avoid the estate tax. So when you pass away, all of that gets taken care of. And again, if you do it with a sacred account, your trust now becomes an investment acquisition machine. You don't want to just throw premiums in life insurance and have it go in a trust and nobody can use that money right now. So you have the trustee buying real estate, doing private lending, buying and borrowing against the life insurance, arbitraging to earn that dividend and still getting the asset growth. And then you have them basically just paying that cash flow back in. That way you've got two things happening inside that trust. Okay. So that's how we avoid estate tax. And I want to show you guys just as a summary. Like the first thing, have a will. Like if you don't have a will, that's like not wearing underwear. Like just be an adult, get a will. Okay. And if you're like, I don't want to talk to you about it, go put your underwear on. Like figure out how to be a big boy, go get a will. Once you have a will, you have probate happening still. So the trust, the revocable living trust, helps you avoid probate. Again, probate can last 18 months. It can cost up to 15% of your overall estate. So you want to avoid probate by having a revocable living trust. We are able to set these up for our clients. Okay, I believe we only charge $600 to do a revocable living trust for you, which is extremely cheap. And you can update it for free as many times as you want to. Now, to add on that note, guys, if you go to an attorney to set up a trust, they're going to charge you like $3,000. It's not cheap. So $600 is a steal. Now, here's the next thing we're looking on. Estate taxes. So you want to have an irrevocable life insurance trust so you bypass estate taxes. Again, that's the percent rate on anything over $11.4 million if you're single and over $22.8 million if you're married. You want to go through us so we can set it up as a sacred account. You don't want to just pay life insurance premiums that you never benefit from. You can at least use that cash value to acquire assets while you're still living inside the trust by the trustee for the benefit of your heirs. Okay. So all assets with estate tax, all assets, including life insurance, death benefits, are considered part of your taxable estate. That's why you want it owned by the irrevocable life insurance trust. And then finally, if you have a combination of all these things, you're able to avoid probate, saving you 15%. You're able to avoid estate taxes, saving you another 40%, which means the cost of not having this stuff in place, guys, is 55% of your estate going towards legal fees and taxes. How much is that worth to you to save 55% of your estate to your beneficiaries actually getting that money? You didn't do all this work for the IRS to get paid. You didn't do all this work for the IRS to be your beneficiary. You didn't do all this work for an attorney to collect fees on it. Okay. Now here's the deal. In 2018, the IRS collected a total of $38 billion in national estate taxes. That is a viable business, guys. $38 billion in estate taxes collected by the IRS. So for you to look at that number, realize they are very good at their job. They're going to collect that money. For you to look at that number and not think about, damn, that's going to be me one day. Unless I do something about it, unless I set up the right documents, unless I get all of this stuff taken care of and buttoned up. Otherwise, you can be part of that 38 billion. At the end of the day, like that's what's going to happen. So I want you to ask yourself, are you going to let yourself be next? I thoroughly believe taxation is theft. I don't think that you should pay income tax. I don't think you should pay any tax. So if I can help you not pay $38 billion in taxes to a government that's going to use it to spend on debt, to pay off interest that they owe to the Federal Reserve Bank and spend it on war so that they can continue deficit spending to borrow money, I'm going to do that to every degree of my power. So I want to help you guys with this. So in summary, just to kind of wrap things up here, the result of what we covered tonight, you can avoid probate. Okay, that's 18 months. That was a terrible line. Let me redo that line for you guys. Okay, you can avoid probate. That's 18 months and 15% of your assets. Okay, you can plan your legacy the way that you want it to happen. You didn't grow up thinking, man, I can't wait to build money for the state to tell my beneficiaries what they can do with it. Like that was never your goal, right? So you can plan your legacy the way you want to. You can control your end of life decisions with the amount of dignity you have left. on your deathbed, you can actually control what happens with your estate plan. You can avoid estate taxes, like we talked about, that 40% where they pick your pockets after you're dead. And then you can have a sacred account inside of all of this that acquires compounding assets for your heirs forever. It just keeps going and continues building. Okay. And the biggest point here, guys, is that, again, I started with this. I'm going to end with this. Having an estate plan is you putting your flag in the ground for your wealth. For you to say, I want to build wealth, this is important to me, and then not do something that's congruent with you being wealthy, you're not going to be wealthy. For me to say, I want to be a billionaire, but I'm not going to spend money to put an estate plan in place, means I don't actually think it's going to happen. And I don't actually plan on it. And it's just something I say because I think it sounds cool, but I have no intention of following through. Like, it's called cognitive dissonance. You can't think one thing and then do the opposite. Whatever you think is the reality of what's going to happen. So if I don't do it, it means I actually have a disagreement with being wealthy, and I'm not willing to take the simple steps to say, yeah, this is a real thing. I'm going to commit to it and make it happen. So this is part of that commitment. So if you're watching tonight, these are the things we help our clients with. Okay, there's not another person in your corner saying, hey, dude, I know you're going to be wealthy and I want to help you save 55% of that in taxes and legal fees. And I'm going to help you set it up. Like, all in for reals, guys, with an entire estate plan to do your will, your living will, your healthcare directive, your ILIT, all of the stuff we've talked about tonight, we can probably do for you for less than $1,000. And you'll have legal support, and you'll have an attorney you can call anytime. And if you did get audited, our attorneys will represent you in court for free. That's how badass our program is. There's no one else doing that for you. So if you're a client of ours, check out these services with us. If you're not a client of ours yet, we want to encourage you to do that. You can go to sacredaccount.com. Again, sacredaccount.com. You can acquire and learn more about it.